Well, Valerie, what a pleasure to have you on Pioneering Paradox today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you met Will a little bit in the little pre-thing we did, but I'm excited to connect you two. And if anybody hasn't listened to me and Valerie's podcast, we did a 2-part series back in October that was super fun. And we're doing a trip to Italy this coming September, October. That's going to be super fun. That booked out in like just a few days.
Yeah, less than a week.
Yeah, so that's going to be amazing. Wish you were coming, Will.
I do too.
But, well, Valerie, we got some fun things to talk about today.
Yes, I'm very excited about this.
I want to ask you, how's California going?
So far, so good. Yeah, I mean, I can't complain about the weather in January. Having lived most of my life in Utah or in the Midwest, it's nice and sunny, and yeah, we're adjusting. Okay, we're back and forth a little bit because we've got a kid. One of our youngest is graduating in the Midwest, and so we're sort of doing a little bit of a split custody between California and Missouri for the next few months.
Nice.
What part of California are you in?
We live in the LA area in Pasadena, to be exact.
Oh, that's cool. I actually have a hard time with LA, but I am in love with Pasadena.
It's gorgeous.
It's so cool. It's like its own little place, and it's so pleasant and cute, and yeah, I don't know.
It's very special. It was love at first sight for me when I saw it. It was just beautiful and quaint, and yeah. So
this has just been in the back of your head for a long time, or what?
Yeah, for the last many years, Nathan and I have been playing around with the idea of doing something adventurous as our children got a little bit older.
Yeah.
And living in the Midwest was more oriented around a job and not family or connection. And although it was a really great place to raise our children and we have no regrets, it also was an era. And then when things became really complicated with the church and things like that, it just was it felt like a natural break, like a natural next
transition.
To do something differently, and going towards one of the coasts was seemed like it made a lot of sense from the like our worldview perspective, but also Nathan and I are very adventurous and outdoorsy, and we wanted to go somewhere where we could really play and focus on our relationship and recreation and nature, and this area has all of those things. So, yeah.
You know what?
That is awesome.
I think that's a good transition. I'm going to pull an audible because I have point number 3 here, which is what we're going to talk about today is the myth of normal. And this was, Will runs a book club here. It's an all-male book club, and we have like 40 guys in it, and it's just awesome. And Will he does such a great job of just hosting that and making a safe space for us to talk about anything. There's like everything is on the table. And we did Gabor Maté's book, The Myth of Normal. And I kept thinking to myself, what do we want to talk with Valerie about? And I'm like, not necessarily the book, but the concept of the myth of normal, which is like, what do we think is normal that's actually causing some pain? That might be something that we literally are just breathing every single day, and we don't even stop to think about it or realize it, but it's actually causing dissonance and strife. And which leads me to, I actually had this as point number 3, because we're going to talk about 4 different points here, but was I kind of classified this as a cinder block or Wonder Bread church. And when I say that is because I'm going to preface it by saying this. My friend, who's a Latter-day Saint, went up to Utah State here, and he was doing the Natural Resources program as an undergrad for becoming a lawyer. He was going to do water rights and all this sort of thing. The non-Mormon professor, very first day, pulled out the Book of Mormon and said, And he went through and he showed all these instances because he knew a lot of his students were going to be Latter-day Saints. And he said 90% of the scriptures that we have, the 90% of the spiritual experiences that people have within scripture happened outside, happened in the outdoors, happened in the mountains, happened near the sea, happened in these places where people were connecting with a nature, divine nature. And so I'm springboarding off of you saying you love nature, you love the beach and love going out and doing adventurous things. But we have kind of structured our church after a very correlated, very cinder blocky room where we have just kids inside of a cinder block room. And Will can relate to this because he's got some ADHD and we've both maybe got a little of that. So
you can here's a sacrament talk. You can talk about anything you want, but here's your proof sources.
Right.
Whoa, that one is hard for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Let's talk about that a little bit because I think it leads to a really boring experience for a lot of kids.
Yes, oh wow, there's so many directions I could go, but what came up for me first of all is that when we think about the origins of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we are a Western capitalist church that whose origins are from Protestantism, and it's all steeped in so much masculine energy, right? I mean, patriarchy is a piece of it, but even more so than that, it's leaning into masculine energy, which is more about structure, it's more about outcome, it's more about direction and organization. And that's where I think one can look at how a cinder block correlated church makes a lot of sense, right? Because when we move into the feminine, it's not as structured. It's more about intuition. It's more about receiving. It's more about the flow. And incidentally, when people have a profoundly spiritual experience in nature, oftentimes I think it is more connected to the way the feminine energy radiates within our world and within each of us. And I don't care what one's gender is. This is not a gendered thing. This is more about the way nature speaks to the human being is never going to be correlated. And I think it's a threat sometimes to patriarchal institutions because in some ways it's like, hold on, what are you hearing out there that you can't hear in here? And
right.
Furthermore, what if you're hearing something out there that is contradicting or that is in some ways independent or more sort of coming from within one's own self, the divine within? And I think that does become a threat. So I think I threw just a whole bunch out there, but that was the first sort of way my thoughts went.
I
mean, you think of Mother Earth. We think of Mother Earth as a feminine energy. This is actually really good for me to hear because I kind of, in my brain, I'm going, in my youth, there was much more of like a scouting type thing. It was very masculine for me. So there's like this, almost like this rite of passage that was much more prevalent inside of the church. And I, if I want to stop and think about it, I had probably more of a testimony of my scouting experiences than I did of the church ever. Because we were constantly in the woods. And what I thought was, and this is interesting because a lot of my scout leaders were ex-military. Some of them were in World War II, some of them were in the Korean War, which was much more common back then. But there was kind of this space where we just sat around the campfire. There was not like a testimony meeting. There was not any like, hey, it's time for us to share our feelings. It was just like, talking about stuff. There was, and I've been kind of studying male rites of passage right now, and I'm like, I don't think, and that some of those rites of passage that you see in a lot of cultures throughout millennia are happening or occurring. We do have a mission where both girls and boys can go out and have this moment where they kind of find themselves. But so many of the rites of passages have to be with like letting go, and you're going into the wilderness and you're going on a walkabout, or you're going to detach, or you think of the 40 days that Jesus is in the wilderness. And he comes back with all these parables that are all about fig trees and gardening and earth and stuff.
Mountaintops and food.
Right.
And
So I'm finding this, we're detached. We're detaching from that more and more. What do you guys think about that? Like,
Well, what you just said, Casey, is really interesting, because if you think about you as a young man connecting with your friends and your leaders in nature, this is unstructured. This is moving into a place
Totally.
of openness and flow, which is one of the profound feminine attributes of what it means to be a human. And there's nothing like the fact that that really resonated with you. I love so much, because what it says is that any organization, Christian or whatever, if you move into a place where humans can connect with their surroundings and with others in an unstructured way, they will touch into the divine. And you did that. And it's very common. Like, you don't find
Right.
too many people that just like, oh, I hate nature. I feel so disconnected to everyone and everything when I'm out there in the mountains. It doesn't generally happen that way. It's the opposite usually.
yeah.
I like that restructuring of kind of the feminine, like burdened or the unstructured capacity.
What do you
Yeah.
What do you guys think about the future and the trajectory of our church with that unstructured bit in mind? Because it seems like we are stepping further and further away, rather than like embracing spaces where there is unstructured time to be organically mentored by either an older teenager or, an adult or someone. Because I feel like there's less space and less times that's happening. I'm also like kind of bitter that there's no high adventure anymore. I keep lobbying for a co-ed high adventure for our youth.
I mean, we're already doing dating in the mission field.
Yeah, dude, let's do
I
co-ed.
loved your stories about that. I mean, it's just, we're living in wild times, Valerie.
Yeah, we really are. And not to digress too much, but it did occur to me that perhaps one of the things that kept, I don't know, some degree of interest between elder and sister missionaries was the forbidden nature of it. Now that, grandma and grandpa are setting you up, all potential couplehoods may go away more so than emerge.
That's interesting.
That's an interesting thought. There could be the forbidden fruit is taken away, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
once you
it's going to
correlate
just
something-
attract, or it's just going to be like, hey, we got a fresh market here, We'll find out. Anyway, getting back to this, I honestly, like, one of the biggest covenants or promises I ever made was on a canoe. My dad used to take me on just the craziest, like, my dad had a big poster up at Yellowstone Ranger Station of a canoe packed with like our whole house was inside of this canoe, and they gave him a ticket. And they took a picture of it and put it up on a poster in the ranger station with a big cross through it of what not to do. And my dad loved stopping by the ranger station and just asking the rangers, like, what kind of an idiot does that? And they're like, oh, we get all kinds. He thrived on it. But when I was a kid, we would go backcountry canoeing, and I take my kids to do this too. But on Shoshone Lake, which is the largest backcountry lake in the United States, in lower 48, and it's very remote, and it's 9 miles long, and we got caught in June in a blizzard in Whitecaps with winter coats on in the middle of a canoe with like an inch from the top of the canoe, the water is just slapping up inside of it, and we're going across a 4-mile stretch, which you're not supposed to do. And a lot of people have died on this lake up there. And I just like praying. I'm 14 years old, and I'm just like, Lord, get me out of this, and I will. Like, I made one of the biggest promises of my life that I consider to be one of a covenant that I made in that instance that I don't think could have happened in a cinder block wall. Is all I'm saying. Like, I think there. So if I look back on all the experiences I had, I'm like, oh my gosh, they never happened in cinder block inside of a 12 by 12 room. They were always outside. So my challenge, I guess, is to listeners is to consider this, consider that there's a disconnect and that we really maybe need to open, like, this is not going to happen on an institutional level. So I saw the writing on the walls 15 years ago. I'm like, this has to be taken up by individual parents and families and neighbors to get their kids out and get them experiencing something of the real, because it's not going to happen on the institutional level anymore. So
I think what you're bringing up in me is that from the perspective of where the LDS Church is in its own faith development, it is oriented around the doing.
Yeah.
Right. Like what can be measured.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, to sort of create a curriculum or measurables that can be performed and checked off inside of the church. Sometimes I think, again, from a corporate or a capitalist perspective, which we're kind of embedded in, that's how you measure success or performance. And what we're talking about and what your experience speaks to, Casey, is you're connecting with the divine in the canoe in a scary moment was not created around a measurable, not created around a curriculum to sort of strengthen your testimony or to find God. And it reminds me a little bit of the concept of ritual. I'm studying a lot up on ritual right now because I'm preparing a series for that. And like insight and lesson manuals is never going to change the human being. Experience is that which changes the human being. Transformation comes from experience, from going out into the world and like negotiating with the world. And I think that's what you're both describing in terms of your earlier lives in, the scouting programs, notwithstanding all of the complexities of, the Boy Scout program, but notwithstanding a lot of people through outdoor experiences and through being with nature, they commune with something divine inside of them. And that in and of itself is kind of, it's an informal ritual where we come to recognize that I can feel something of my own divinity inside of nature, because nature is often, if you think of the great chain of being, nature is often referred to by the early philosophers as spirit slumbering. It's just a lower form of spirit. And so we're connected with God in nature. It's not a coincidence that it's happening. We're connecting with our own.
That's cool. Okay, Valerie, you started off saying you've been studying about rituals. So to me, my uneducated brain, I think rituals, I think standardization, like repeated things over and over again. So, but then you segued into it's all about experiences. So like, how do we use, maybe, can you tie those two a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah. So what I hear from you is that your definition of ritual has been too correlated, right?
That's my myth of normal, probably.
Yeah. There you go. Right. And so the way I think about ritual is to sort of shake things loose a little bit is every morning I get up and study for a couple of hours while I'm exercising, which sounds like how does someone, like, I don't know, inner ear, super skill or something, but I can read while I'm running. That is a sacred ritual to me. That is something that connects me to my body, my mind. It connects me to God, because it's where I learn, and it's where most of my like revelation comes as far as like who I am and why I'm here in the world. That is a ritual. And so to sort of make that a little bit larger and connect it with nature, ritual is anything that a human does to make a deeper meaning of their own lives, right? In other words, ritual is oftentimes an action connected to something that provides us deeper connection or deeper meaning. And sometimes a ritual is connected to a rite of passage, like a big change in our lives. It's generally speaking connected to community and support, and like, we're in this with you. And it's almost always connected to sort of the cycles of life, like a birth, death, and a rebirth experience as we evolve in life. And so connecting ourselves and then moving into this concept of nature, it just to me means that if we are systematically drawn to nature, and we know that we find the divine there, to return there over and over again is actually our creating our own sense of what resonates with me. And that becomes my temple of learning. That becomes my connecting moment with God.
Yeah. This is such a such a good segue into our next section, because we have, which is kind of like finding your inner voice. And when we have such a kind of a prescribed set of rituals that we have within the Latter-day Saint community, where we have sacrament, we have these things, we do it, and to the point, we're like, make sure you take it with your right hand. I think it's just been re-emphasized recently, which is like, if we look back at the early rituals of the sacrament, there's no authority. It's just like they're literally just meeting for dinner. They're like, we're breaking bread in somebody's home, and there's not like this control over that aspect, and they're literally just rubbing. Richard Rohr calls it table fellowship, and but I kind of want to talk about this because I know this is a big thing that you talk about, and a lot of people are struggling with. I've got somebody out of the country right now who is messaging me frequently, who is like, he's in leadership in the church. He's like, I've never had my own voice. I have never been able to have the space to have my own voice. So I want to kind of segue this concept of wilderness and just stop to think about how we're so inundated with callings, and the norm is that we just always have a calling. We always do the prescribed rituals. We always do the stuff. Veering off of that path is not, there's no time for it. And when I stop to think, reverting back to Jesus, 40 years in the wilderness, I have to wonder what his family and friends are thinking. Where'd Jesus go? Sure been out there a long time.
He missed his home teaching appointment.
Right.
He was gone for
right.
Yeah.
There's not a prescribed necessarily ritual for a 40-day fast, but it seemed to be something that needed to be done, that had to happen. And so I want to talk about just quickly this myth that not the thing that we feel like is normal, that people don't ever feel a capacity to be able to maybe itch or scratch an itch that they have. They're like going, I really want to go like sit with a tribe in Africa. And you know what I'm talking about? Because I had these itches where I'm like, I want to go do this, but I'm like, I don't have time. I got a calling.
Dude, there is literally a Shoshone elder that speaks like twice a year up at Maple Grove Hot Springs. And guess why I don't go? It's always during church. And I'm like, that seems like maybe it would be a really good church outing.
Right.
But I don't take my family and go.
So I guess there needs to be somebody, if you're listening and you're feeling like this, I think what happens a lot of times, people start to resent. They go, you know what, I don't have this capacity, so I just resent, rather than putting up a boundary and saying, here's a boundary. I know that right now I actually need to create some space to listen to my own voice for a little while. It might be in the wilderness. It might be through meditation or running or whatever. Talk about that for a little bit, because I know you see this in a lot of people, because it's a very common thing.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking about, first and foremost, is maybe if we were to take a tiny step back and just let's define a couple of things. For one thing, there's a difference between what's normal and what's normative. Normal is what a culture or society defines as acceptable, that's generally stabilizing to themselves. Right?
Yeah.
And normative is what is psychologically typical for health and development and flourishing in a human being. In other words, normal can be healthy or unhealthy, depending on what is helpful for the culture, whatever that given culture is. And what's normative can be very healthy, but considered very unhealthy by the culture if it doesn't forward the goals of the society or the given culture. Okay, so that's something that I just want, like, I think there's like that piece matters in this, because
That's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. And so to circle back to what you were both saying a second ago, what's normal in early stage faith Mormonism is outsource your authority, be compliant, be participative, and attend as much as you can, and serve and do all of the things that you can to lift up the community, which part of the big narrative is that will always lift you up too. That's kind of the normal, right? That's the social norm. What's normative in human growth and development is that early in one's life, one does in fact need to outsource their authority because they don't have enough life experiences and their brains have not quite developed enough to know who they are and what they think and believe. And it's kind of scary to grow up and be somebody that makes mistakes and is trying to figure themselves out. And so what's normative is that as one evolves psychologically and spiritually and whatnot, they do begin to move away from the outsourcing of all of their authority, and they start to check in with themselves. Say, for example, on a Sunday morning, Will, and say, you know what, this other competing invitation might fill my soul more than here, where I may be, bored and not really resonating with what's going on here. And the normative thing to do in that particular case, in terms of psychological human growth and development, is to allow yourself to be drawn towards that which resonates with you spiritually, not what you've been told you need to do, and told that if you're not feeling the right way, then that's your problem. Stay and do it harder.
Yeah.
But to actually step into your own selfhood and allow your inner divine to guide you to what feels like it resonates with your connection with God. And that's why nature does the same thing. It's like normal to say no. In Mormonism, it's normal to say there's a little bit of a threat with nature because we got all these people wanting to like hike in the mountains on a Sunday morning, but you need to be in priesthood. It's normative to say, I feel drawn to God in this way, and maybe in another week you may feel drawn to a church meeting. It doesn't say it's not a black and white prospect, but what I am saying here is, as we evolve, it's more and more appropriate for human beings to determine on their own how much is too much. When is service becoming servitude? When am I not having enough boundaries? When does my church calling impose on my marriage? Like, that's normative, but it may not feel normal in Mormonism.
I love that.
That is so great.
And I just took a note down. Like, that's something I'm gonna like journal about, normal versus normative. I mean, that's like, normative is I think a word that we don't use enough, that needs to hold more ideas in our brains and in our minds.
Our spirits just have, like, by nature, I think stepping into the unknown a little bit is what keeps life exciting. Like, we have this deep spiritual exploratory nature, and so I do think a lot of people end up really resenting because we never learned how to put boundaries. We just were like, no, this is just what we do. You push through it, and we don't ever stop. And you'll figure it out at some point, and you'll understand why you're doing it. But I think it's like the roots in a crack. It's like they're gonna come up. They're gonna keep just growing and yearning. And
are you saying that's gonna happen for everyone?
I think they'll either shut it down. I think everybody has, a spiritual exploratory nature. I think we're by design. And if we're like, I mentioned this on our part 1 and 2, I can't remember, on our podcast, where at least the theology within Latter-day Saint theology is that you're going to continually progress, which means you're not going to be the same as you are right now. And you might really get bored with the same lesson manual every week.
Or every 40
The
years.
same, well, for the rest of your life, the same questions, the same, like, very corporate structure, you know? So anyway, that's such a great insight. Thank you for that. I love that distinction.
Do you have any questions before we move on, Val? I'm always like, I'm just so you know, I'm like fascinated with therapists because I don't know. I feel like they're like the modern day sorcerers. They have magic and they know more than we do.
Well, I think at least in my case, I just say the stuff out loud more than most people do.
Fair. Okay. No, go ahead, Casey.
Okay. So another one that I wanted to kind of tap into is this kind of concept that feels really normal, but in fact, it was so I might say normative. I can't remember which one it is, but it felt like that there's kind of a prescribed set of questions that we're supposed to ask. And this also feels tight, feels stringent, because I was going, these are actually not my questions. And you and I mentioned the talk that I had like 8 to 10 people send me the, what's that talk up at BYU, Idaho, that guy, that he's like, there's only 4 questions you should ask. Whether Joseph Smith is a true prophet. I'm like going, I remember when I read Rough Stone Rolling, I found out that there was like 130 people in the area that had seen God.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have this vast world with all these questions. Like, I've never was asked to say, hey, ask if the Dalai Lama or Bishop Tutu is true, or whatever. It's like I'm prescribed a set of questions that I'm supposed to ask, and that might not be the questions that I'm yearning for, that I want. And I think that's a lot of reason why people just kind of go, I'm getting my bread buttered somewhere else. But I want to read this thing that I think is very normal in our culture, which is to send a 3-4-year-old kid up in primary to say, I know the church is true, I know this, and it seems very normal, but I actually think it is creating like the foundation, the sandy foundation for a kid to like just deliberately fall. And this is Francis Bacon. He says, if a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts. But if he will begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. Now, I don't know if that second part is always true, because sometimes you end up like the more you learn, the less you know, you feel like. But that first part seems to be very true. A lot of people have this, it's very normal to just send a kid up and we got to start using this language. And
our vernacular.
Yeah, but I don't think there's enough discussion around the fact that that's actually literally setting kids up for failure.
Yeah. I want to say something about Bacon's quote, if I may.
Yeah.
Because when you sent that over and I was looking at sort of our plans, that did give me pause also. But then I really leaned into it and I liked it. And the reason why is this, because when we allow ourselves to begin with, not only to begin with, but to live in this beautiful sacred space of doubt, there are certain things that we do become sure of. And what I mean by that is the value of goodness. The curiosity around like how different human beings negotiate humanity in ways that draw them closer to one another, to that which is good. And that sort of like that as we evolve and awaken, what bonds us all to one another and to the world itself is love. And so like the capacity to live in uncertainty around, say, for example, dogma or theology or churchy things, it frees us up actually to settle into the things that actually do matter, that are well beyond sort of the surface structures of different cultures or ideologies or religions and things like that. Things like that cease to matter as much as we take a step back and just recognize that, like, this stuff is not what it's all about. And I can become certain about the big things, which is like transcends religious system or dogma and things like that.
What Jesus would probably call the weightier matters of the law.
Correct.
Those things like hope and charity and mercy, those kind of things. That is such a good distinction. Thank you again for clarifying that. Because yeah, I do. There are certain things I'm just like, no, I just know that I need to treat this person this way. I'm not ambiguous about some of those things. But I do want to like just revert back a little bit to this idea that I keep my biggest problem is that with church is exclusivity is like the idea that we just have this exclusive. The language is changing. When we were young, it was like we have the whole puzzle, like, and other people have fragments of the puzzle, and now I've just kind of realized we're like a piece of the puzzle, and we can also be a beautiful piece of the puzzle, but we're a piece of the puzzle. And one of the things that I noticed one of my best friends was really struggling with was he had some deep resentment because he was like told you stay within the parameters of what the Quorum of the 12 is saying or the prophet is saying. And he felt like that kept him withheld from actual very helpful things inside of other cultures that were like meditation, or in his instance, like he became independently wealthy because he really liked Tony Robbins. Like he's like, holy crap, this is like really benefiting my family to have some financial independence, and that kind of really helped all sorts of aspects. And so I think that is, I've wondered often if there's if you want to call it a sin in exclusivity, that would be the concept that we're withholding all these, because we're narrowing people down that you can only ask these questions. For the first time in the history of the world, we have access to the world's wisdom traditions. And we may be withholding some stuff that might help a kid with depression. Or, I've said if I were running the MTC, I would bring in yoga people, and I would bring in somebody to teach Buddhism, secular Buddhism, to help kids understand their thoughts and where they're coming from, and how to regulate emotion and be mindful. Anyway, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think what you're describing, to me at least, is that the myth of normal in this case is what's been normalized in Mormonism is certainty, right? Which is very that's the core of fundamentalism, and I think at the we are in a fundamentalist plus era, I think, in Mormonism, right? Like where it's like certainty. And that is anxiety management, to be able to say, this is the plan of salvation. This is exactly where we came from, what we're doing, where we're going. And all of these things is an effort to keep people safe, and to manage existential, the unknown. And yet what you're describing, Casey, is that it ultimately can prove to be an anxiety management pill, but it doesn't have a good shelf life. It doesn't last long, because the promises made, generally speaking, are somehow they're generally connected to some sort of a if-then transaction multiplied by some form of magical thinking, and oftentimes whatever is promised in real life on the ground doesn't work. And then we deprive ourselves of the greater light and knowledge that is out there because we're afraid of the very real possibility of people finding truth everywhere, because it is in fact everywhere.
So, Valerie, from your point of view, what is something concrete we could do from within the church? I'm just making this question up as I go, but I have the idea in my mind. But what is something concrete we could do within the church to kind of prevent that from happening, from giving, to like give people the freedom to think? Like, what would that look like?
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say that I do a lot of consulting with people that want to stay connected to the church and our parents, and they're like, okay, they're going to primary, say for example, and they're learning this. And I don't love that. But there are
Mhm.
so many other things that I hear that they go to primary and that I do like. And so it's like, how do I navigate this where we're holding on to the goodness of Mormonism, but sort of helping our children navigate, or like they're like from the parenting perspective, they're like, how do I do that? And the way
Yeah.
I talk to parents is to actually at an age appropriate in an age appropriate way talk to them about, first of all, every church wants to believe it's God's favorite. It's a way that human beings try to navigate the fact that it's scary to be a human and you definitely want to be God's favorite. And so we do this, but so do the people across the street and down the street. So we all think we're the best. We all think we're the only true ones. So you're going to hear that when you go to primary. But what we're going to be talking about here at our house is that everyone's right. All of the churches are trying their hardest and doing their best, and God doesn't have a favor, but it's okay if we think we're the best one if it makes us feel safe. Second example would be something like,
I love it so far.
Or important.
yeah. And so the second example that comes up all the time is the issue of patriarchy. And so I would say to parents, when you talk to your children, and this is not just the little girls, because patriarchy is harmful to the little boys too, is to say churches sometimes are the last ones to get the memo about certain things. And so there's a lot of traditions that go way, 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 way back, long, 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 thousands of years ago, that got it all messed up, that taught people, and they passed it down, and it's crazy, but that the boys are somehow like have a special different power than girls. It's sort of silly. It's outdated. You don't find that at school and on your soccer team, but it's just a silly thing that's going on, and it's happening in our church. So when you see them treating the boys differently, they haven't caught up yet. But in our house, the boys and the girls, we treat you as uniques and special, and there is not one that is better than another. And so what you're doing is you're normalizing growth and development of human beings and even of institutions, and you're also normalizing to the child, I see something in there that feels normal in there, but I'm learning a little bit of critical awareness, why it's normal there, but it's not normal in my house, and it's not normal at school, and it's not normal in the other places. And so you're helping the child from preventing cognitive dissonance, but you're also saying, and it's okay that they don't get everything right, because we don't either, and neither do your teachers at school or the people on the news, but we're going to talk about this. And so you're offering a bit of, like, it's a critical awareness cognitive skill that you can continue to apply to the problematic parts of the church, that helps them also, first of all, be able to talk to you and have dialogue, but also it helps them feel like they don't have to have this black and white, like, church good, church bad, you're all in, you're all out, like, and then they can, if they want, they can enjoy and appreciate the value, but also not sort of sweep under the rug the problematic pieces that might be getting internalized inside of the children and become very problematic down the road.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps kind of on the ground, but.
And it's definitely,
I love it.
It's definitely a more of a healthy, because when we were growing up, I mean, in my head, I'm just thinking about in my little town when I was at South Jordan. South Jordan had 0 restaurants when I was growing up.
That's weird.
There was an Arctic Circle across the border in West Jordan. And I kind of think of it like when we were growing up, there's like, you have one restaurant in town, it's got steak and potatoes, and you're like, that's where we go. And steak and potatoes are the best. And da, 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 da. And now we look around and you go, in the same town, there's Thai food. There's all these kids are getting exposed. I just asked a kid the other day, 5-year-old, what his favorite food was. He told me scallops. And I'm like, okay, it would have been corn dogs or whatever, pizza 10, 15 years ago. And so just naturally, I think what you're saying is you're setting a kid up for a broader perspective, so they don't have this moment where they go, wait, I was told we were the best. And then they have a realization that that we actually aren't the best. Like there's a lot of other people out here living this experience. So I love that perspective. If it's okay, I'm going to shift to the very last one, which to me is actually probably the closest, dearest to my heart. And that is this perspective, this normal. Let me tell you this first of all. I had a very, very close friend growing up, and his dad quit going to church when he was 10 years old. And my friend, he told me, he said, all of the ward and family and everybody's like, we've got to get him back to church. And we've this effort, all prayers, all this stuff is like going. He said, at age 10 years old, my dad was my hero. And he said, as soon as he quit going to church, everybody around me informed me subconsciously that my dad something is wrong with my dad. Something is broken in my dad. And so he's been through a lot of therapy, a lot of resentment towards the church because of the image that it portrayed towards his father that he looked up to so much, became now a project all through his junior high school years up into through college. And so I have a lot of people who are listening who are in mixed faith or who are struggling. They're the person who's not going to church and da da da. And it's literally, it's kind of normal for us to think, well, the only option we have if you're inside of the church is to bring them back. And there's not a lot of imagination around, and this to me has been one of at a certain point, kids who have parents they're just like, holy crap, my dad is such a good person, or my mom was such a good person, and they were kind of not treated really well. At some point, a lot of those kids come to a reckoning where they're like, I actually don't like the way my dad or mom was treated, and they end up in a faith crisis because of that. Totally. And so I want to talk about this because it feels like it was more normal. Like I remember when I was a kid, like there was a guy that stood up and he's like, I think so-and-so is a better man than is the guy in my neighborhood who smoked cigarettes, who was in the Vietnam War. Somebody in Elders Quorum stood up and said, I think that man is a better man than any of us here. And there was all these stories a lot of times about, even like, I remember my stake president was an alcoholic. His stake president is like, I need you to sober up because you're going to be the bishop. Like, and he's like, okay, I guess I better quit drinking. That kind of story happened a lot more and doesn't seem as prevalent these days. One more story I was telling Will, my grandma across the street from her house growing up was a Protestant woman who they're like, oh yeah, Averill, she teaches primary. She teaches primary they just brought her in and they let her teach primary. And so this concept of wayward that we equate people to Layman and Lemuel or Korihor, that there's not a category for just a lot of people who are still believing in Jesus and still like maybe even better than they were when they were in the church or whatever.
Yeah.
Is causing a lot of, still to this day is causing so many fractures in marriages. And I don't know, let's end on this note. Let's kind of dive into that for a little bit because I know this is something you see a lot, and I'd love to hear some perspective.
Yeah. Well, first, it just makes me so sad because I do spend so much time with this exact thing. If I were to say the thing that is brings the most pain to people on a faith journey here in the church, it's how it impacts their relationships, and it is devastating for marriages and families. It really is, because of this very thing, which is sort of the normalization of like the church narrating or owning the narrative of every single experience of anybody who does something different outside of the sort of the correlated path, and how compelling that narrative is, so much so that in some cases a partner will choose the narrative over the living flesh and blood human being in front of them, and they don't want to hear their stories, they don't want to hear their experiences, because in some ways I think it's because listening to the real experience of the other, the person, their family member, it destabilizes their own sense of identity, because they are so identified by the narratives, like the larger narratives of the church, inclusive of what, you know, what's happening to your partner, even though the partner's over there going, that's not what's happening. That's not my story, right? And so so that's heartbreaking, but very, very normalized. I guess the second thing I was thinking about is that one of the things I feel has been the most helpful for me and for the people that I consistently work with on through my various things on Latter-day Struggles is to look at what is normal developmentally for not only a human being or a human institution, but for the human race. And I've just started doing this in the last year or so, but it has profoundly impacted me and others that I've worked with. And what I mean by that is that the human race also goes through predictable stages of development. And in early development, what the human race does, and each of us sort of starts at ground zero, is we only have the perspective of ourselves. And then as we evolve and grow, our capacity to take the perspective of others grows, which means in another way, we are more and more and more and more and more capable to love. But early in development, we only have the ability to see the perspective of just so many people. And sometimes people stagnate in their own highly compelling tribe. And what that means is it creates a circle of insiders and outsiders. And so if you have that paradigm, then everybody inside of my circle, and for our conversations purposes, everyone that's in the church is my people. I get their perspective because they share my perspective, and so they make sense. And as soon as somebody goes on a faith journey, even if it is your own child or your own mother or your own partner, they move from inside of the circle to outside the circle. They move from friend to stranger or even enemy. And developmentally, that's what human beings do. And then I think sometimes this becomes codified in the theology. It's an unfortunate phenomenon developmentally, but then sometimes churches that are in that stage of development, they actually turn it into their part of their theology. They make it official. And they also make it like a formal, like they are frightening. They are going to lead you away. They are. And so it's normal, but it's heartbreaking and devastating. And one of the things that I have been really working hard on with some of the sociologists and researchers that are doing a lot of the data, like the studies in the church and the demographic studies and things like that, is that is to depathologize faith journey, to depathologize what it means to be a differentiating human being in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because we're doing the same thing that other people are doing elsewhere. We're growing, we're becoming more autonomous, we're asking questions, we're becoming interior authorities, we're doing normative things. And what the church is asking us and what they have normalized that is more stabilizing to the institution is not, in fact, normal. It's abnormal and it's not healthy frequently.
Yeah, and I don't know how you escape it, because as long as there's a narrative of like a theological narrative, which is deeply embedded in stories like Korihor and all, you know, all these folklore stories that we have around spilled milk and people who got offended or anything like that. I think this goes back to, I think, what you were talking about, the Faith Matters, that guy was talking about. I think one of our biggest issues is our imagination. We have a lack of imagination of what is possible for people to be outside of. There was a high councilman that came and spoke, at my daughter's mission homecoming, and he started kind of equating wayward people with Laman and Lemuel. And this is, if I'm gonna just, if there's any, I hope there are some active Latter-day Saints listening right now that have spouses or kids who have left or who are doing their own thing. Yeah, there's going to be wayward in the context of like they're on drugs or they're like, that's, that's a whole different story. But the majority of people who end up just choosing a different path are really still on a spiritual journey of like, they're finding like a purpose in a lot of different ways. And they're just like amazing people. And so I think we need to just open and expand our mindset. I remember there was a lady in our neighborhood who she worked with people on the suicide hotline, and she was so good at it. And we were like, we need you to have a calling. She ended up leaving the church, but she was like, because she got so constricted in this space, and she didn't have time to do the suicide hotline anymore. And so she left the church and went back to that because it was just like,
wow.
So I guess what I'm saying is she's this amazing human who the stake president is telling her, if you leave the church, it's not going to be well for you in this neighborhood. And that's literally what happened. They just they literally had to move away. And so those are things that are very, very common. And I don't know how you overcome it because it really takes people. I think tribal mentality is built into our DNA. So it could be the Green Bay Packers, you could be like, it could be anything. But I guess that's maybe what it means to transcend or to become like a child or all the narratives that Jesus is talking about, to get to a space where we have the capacity as a people, as individuals. And I just want to say that I think that actually some people are going to have to, in order to accept their husband or their spouse or their loved ones, they may have to go against the church on certain stances and be like, but I think we get to the end and God's going to be like, wait, you chose a church? You chose an institution over your child or your husband? Like, just put that into perspective.
Well, even the, I'm thinking the creation story is fresh in my mind. Like, however it was, transgression, sin, whatever, Eve ate the fruit first, and they weren't supposed to. That's in air quotes for everyone that's just listening. Like, what happened? Adam was like, well, God said not to, but I'm with you, Eve. Like, he's like, I'm with you. I'm like, is that a message? Is that a message to stick with your spouse? Like, through if there's a choice to stick with the institution or to stick with your spouse,
as long as there's no abuse or whatever.
Yeah, naturally. Yeah.
Well, and I think something too that I caught there a second ago, Will, is that we so frequently conflate the church with actual God, right? In other words, what kind of God would ask you to leave a partner and a child in order to like maintain loyalty to a literal corporation? And I don't mean to like demean the church as a corporation only, but churches they're institutions. They're not God. And what we're doing here in this life and in our intimate relationships, whether it be family or partnerships or whatever, is we are learning how to actually embody Godhood in the context of these relationships. So to choose away from that, the opposite of what it means to be learning how to find God within and God in the other. And I think that's something that like, to give us pause and to just think about that. Last thing I want to say about this particular topic that came up for me a second ago is what I've noticed, having the real privilege, I think, and I'm so honored that like I do a lot of work with couples where one of the partners is still quite devout, and usually it's the man, and the woman is generally on a faith journey. And I just feel like deeply honored that the devout partner trusts me. Like, I really do under the circumstances. That's saying something, right? But what I notice is, even for those who want to kind of hold both, is there is something in Mormonism, if not Mormon theology, that I think is a little loophole, which is, you know what, God's going to work it out. I can choose my partner, and I can stay in the church, and I can live in mystery, and God's going to work it out. And I think what we all kind of know is that the way God's going to work it out is the someday awakening of a partner going, you know what, I chose my partner and God never cared in the first place. Like, it's like we're all just trying to do our best, right? But that's in some ways the way that they reconcile what theologically is irreconcilable in the church, which is you have to be temple married and like all of the boxes need to be checked. And yet that's not what the Mormon modern family looks like anymore. And it's more and more and more. We are a mixed faith church, community, marriage. It's what's happening. And so we need to learn how to lean into that and to normalize it in like the healthiest possible way.
And statistically, we have more single people than married people, and in the United States, in the world. So that can be problematic. So I just want to kind of throw out, just in finishing up here, some thoughts. I do what you said here. I do think part of the process for somebody who is, and maybe a safe way to look at this is going, we do conflate the gospel also with church too. And the gospel is really, I don't see them one and the same. When somebody says the gospel, they're referring to the church. And I'm like, I don't see that as the same at all. Mm-hmm. I see Jesus's message doesn't have anything to do with like church policy on multiple earrings or anything like, there's so much conflated into that. So I think it does, if anybody's listening, maybe a good starting point too is to start kind of decoupling some of this verbiage of that God and church are synonymous. And because for your children, and I had a long conversation with a BYU religion professor who was deeply concerned that because we had conflated so much of church with God, it is leading to far more Latter-day Saint young people to atheism. Because as soon as there is like this, you say, we don't know why God wanted this racist policy. We don't know why God wanted polygamy. We don't know why God wants patriarchy. Now you conflate God with the kind of just being a big butt in the sky. And you're going, that is, and so they go, and that's woven into every fiber of their being. I'm going to say it in that way. Is that okay? And like, how do you decouple that? So a lot of people end up going through this process of going, I don't believe in God anymore. Some people just never do again, but a lot of people come back around and go, okay, I deconstructed the institution from God, and now I'm ready to get back into the saddle again and
with God,
or whatever that looks like. It might look differently and feel differently. So I think, I don't keep this in mind when we're raising kids and we're setting up what seems to be normal, that we're using this language of, I know this is true, the gospel is true, we don't know why God did this, is all, to me, is literally what Jesus was trying to say. What you're building your house on sand. And so I'm gonna end there. Does anybody else have anything else they want to say? Valerie, do you have anything else you want to throw in there?
Well, I would tag on to what you just said, Casey, that one thing that needs to be challenged really hard is our Western Christian ideas of God.
Oh, huge.
Right. And the way we have normalized a white male punitive God that demands a blood sacrifice of there are so many problems with that in and of itself. And that's not necessarily even Mormonism, but we are enveloped in Western Christianity, and we have normalized all sorts of crazy things about actual God that causes a cascade of other theological problems that become internalized and actually cause a lot of problems, even down to our own sense of identity and mental health. And so that's a whole other topic for another day, but that's a big one.
And we go down the rabbit hole of saying we've also conflated it with political parties and sorts of stuff that God had nothing to do with. And so there's so much we could tap into here, but I think that normal is not always good. I think that's the key, to stop and to question look around. Cal, my parents been doing this for a long time. Are they happy? Sometimes they are. Sometimes you're like going, they've been doing this certain thing for so long, and you go, Cal, they don't. Look around, look, observe, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying, but Valerie, thank you so much for taking the time. I am so looking forward to being in Italy with you guys.
Oh, I'm jealous.
It's just hanging out there like
You guys are gonna have so much fun.
it's just hanging out there, just like is this amazing thing that's in the future, and I'm stoked for it. So,
Thanks, Valerie.
Thanks for having me.
You are an example of courage and such a cool point in the universe for people. So thank you for doing what you do.
That means a lot to me, Will. It's a pleasure and a privilege to get to be with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Val.
We'll see ya.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.